is a biologist and teacher, working as a science advisor at the Canadian Agriculture Food Museum. She is passionate about sharing her expertise on soil health, gardening, and the science and innovation driving sustainability in agriculture. Always experimenting, Renée-Claude loves to grow unusual crop varieties and to test out different gardening techniques in her own garden and at the museum. Oh, thanks so much for joining us, Renée-Claude. We're so thrilled to have you here. We're excited to learn about all of the secrets of our soil. I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll just block out the Ottawa Public Library photos so that you are the main speaker here, and you can go ahead and share your screen.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I'm really excited to be here. And even though I can't see all of you, thank you all for joining us. I hope today's session is informative and that you get to learn all kinds of fascinating things you might or might not have known about soil before, and that you pick up some gardening tips as well. So soil is a huge topic. When I first started venturing into the science of soil health and soil as applied to agriculture and gardening, I soon found out that I knew very little, and there is a lot to learn, and there's still so much that researchers and scientists don't know. It's a really active field of research, and we're still finding out all the time. But soil science is actually becoming a huge driver for sustainability in agriculture, as a little bit mentioned in my bio. It's not obvious at first, but hopefully through this presentation, you'll see how caring for our soil and applying soil-friendly agricultural practices can really help us mitigate climate change. It can help us have cleaner water, healthier plants, more productivity with less. So that means creating or growing more food with fewer inputs, fewer fertilizers, less work. And hopefully those are the things that you'll be able to do in your garden as well. One thing I've learned over the 10 years I've been gardening already, we tend to give ourselves way more work than we need to. We really like to turn our soil, really work it, and we're going to unlearn all those things today. So I will just share my screen right now. Please bear with me for a moment while I make sure that this goes smoothly. Okay. And there we go. All right. So the secret life of soil. It's actually International Year of Plant Health this year. So happy International Year of Plant Health. It's a UN initiative. We're also in the midst of the International Decade of Soil. So by participating in this, you are supporting these initiatives. And what we're talking about today also supports the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For anybody who is not aware of those, they're basically overarching goals to create a better world, and organizations all around the world are orienting their efforts in order to support I think there's 20 goals. Today, we're looking at zero hunger. We're looking at responsible consumption and production, as well as life on land. So those are the main areas we'll be touching on. Now, a little quick outline: why is soil important? What is healthy soil? How important is soil life in our garden? And garden tips for better soil health. So let's begin here. So soil has actually many functions beyond just growing our food. It is very important for water storage and filtration. So as we're seeing a lot more farms turning into parking lots and farmland being converted into different usage, into urban use, we're also seeing a lot more flooding. And those things are actually related. Soil absorbs water when it rains and it stores it away, but it also cleans it. And it's a very, very important process. So soil plays a vital role in the cycling of water through the atmosphere, through the soil, and back into the water. So plays a very important role there. So soil is super important for that reason, but also for carbon storage and for climate regulation. So I mentioned that quickly earlier. So carbon is really the key of soil function here. We're going to bring back carbon quite a few times through this. But we're all made of carbon, all living things. Carbon is the base element of living things. And the soil is really kind of like the recycling bin of all of the carbon that became living things, and those things died, and then the soil kind of recycles it. Climate regulation, because soil will store the carbon that is trapped by plants. As plants photosynthesize, they turn carbon from the atmosphere into plant matter, which when they die, the plant matter goes into the soil. It gets incorporated and actually locked away into the soil. So it's a very important factor in helping us fight climate change. And finally, it's the base of our ecosystem productivity. Without soil, we wouldn't have plants, we wouldn't have animals, we probably wouldn't be here either. So soil is extremely vital, and that's why we're actually celebrating the Decade of Soils, because it's a very undervalued resource, and we're very lucky to have it so readily, but that might not be the case in the future, as it's under a lot of threats. From erosion to urbanization to pollution. There's a lot of things that are working against soil. So soil can actually only do these things when it's healthy. And we're going to learn what that means in a second. Now I see there's raised hands and chats. I'm just going to give a moment. Are there any pressing questions? So healthy soil has a balance of physical, chemical, and biological elements. So we kind of tend to think of soil as just the dirt under our feet, just this uniform dust, rocks, things like that. But healthy soil, we really have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at physical, chemical, biological. That means the living parts, the chemical parts, and the physical parts. Healthy soil is at the intersection right here. When all these things are in balance, then our soil can actually do its job. So I'm going to keep coming back to this slide. I'm not going to read everything. My presentation style is usually more visual than written things. And you will have the chance at the end to ask questions, so please hang on to those. So the first thing we're going to look at is the physical elements, and that's something that we're more familiar with. Okay, so we're looking here, the physical properties of soil. Soil is made up of sand, silt, and clay. They're mineral particles created through the weathering of rock. So freeze-thaw cycles, erosion, rain, wind, so on. And they all have different particle sizes, which gives them different properties. So sand here obviously is a lot bigger. If we look at silt, then it's a lot smaller. And clay is actually kind of, it's platelets that stack together. So this actually explains why clay is so impermeable. For those who are a little bit more familiar, if you have clay soil at home, you might relate, it might hold a lot of water, and it might also be difficult for it to absorb water when there's a lot of rain. So to have a healthy soil, so to speak, you would need a proper proportion of all of these elements here, because each of these elements has different properties that we want for our soil. So for sand, that would be allowing water to drain through. And for clay, it would be water retention. So some of you might be familiar with the soil texture triangle. This is a standard tool used by agronomists, by farmers in any soil science. And this allows us to identify what type of soil we have, what the properties of our soil might be based on the different quantities of each element that we have in it. So in our garden, the ideal mixture would be what we call a loam. And as you can see, a loam is kind of like the intersection of where we have about 30% or so clay, a little bit less than 30% clay, where we have about 70% silt and about, or sorry, that doesn't make sense. It's 40% sand, 40% silt, and 30% clay. So that brings us here. That makes a little bit more sense. So a loam would be your ideal recipe, but that's actually missing a lot. So we can't just look at our physical properties. You can do a soil test at home very easily. You just take a jar, you take a handful of your soil, make sure it's well crushed, put it in your jar with water, you shake it up and let it sit. And when the water becomes clear again, then you'll see that the different components will have created layers in your jar. All you need to do is measure them and then calculate your ratio. And that should give you an idea of what type of soil you have in your garden at home or wherever you garden, in your community garden, whatnot. The Ottawa Valley, for those who are in Ottawa, is known to have like very clay-rich soil. So in Ottawa, my garden, we have more of a silty clay loam, which it's an interesting thing to work with. Were there any questions? I heard something. No? Okay. I'll keep going. So this a loam will actually, because of the proportions of the different ingredients, we're kind of taking all the best properties of each mineral in this case, each size of mineral. I'll just open my chat here. So silt is a small particle, smaller than sand and bigger than clay. Silt is created, again, just by the weathering of rock. Silt is usually, you'll find that in rivers. So the very fine sand, it's finer than sand, but not clay. So clay really absorbs water, whereas silt is a little bit more similar to sand, if that makes sense. I hope that explains it. Okay. Okay, I hope the person who wasn't hearing is having a easier time now. So yeah, so in your garden, do your soil test and see, and then you'll have an idea of the properties that it'll have. A soil that has a lot of sand will not hold moisture very well. Soil that has a lot of clay will hold a lot of moisture, will compact a lot easily, and a silty one won't have very much nutrient. So what's on the top, middle, and bottom when it settles? So what's on the top will be your lighter elements, so your clay. What will be in your middle will be your silt, and at the bottom will be your sand. So it'll settle in order of weight, basically, density. So I hope that answers that question. Okay. So now that we know about our soil properties, oops, I think I need to. Okay. So another element is structure, and this is a very, very underestimated element of our physical properties of soil. You might see in this image, we have little blobs. Now these are what we call micro aggregates, would be the small ones, and macro aggregates are the big ones. So all that means is micro clumps and macro clumps. So small clumps, big clumps. And those are actually very important in the soil for the structure. So by structure, it's kind of like, imagine you have a cake. You want your cake to have a lot of little bubbles in it. Oops, I have to go back. I hit my mouse the wrong way. Okay, so if your cake has a lot of little bubbles in it, it'll be nice and light and fluffy. But if you're forgetting an ingredient in there and you don't have bubbles, you don't have a leavening agent, your cake is going to be a hard brick. And that's not very good. So it's the same thing for soil here. We want a soil that is light and fluffy. And the reason that it is light and fluffy is because of these clumps that form. And having those clumps creates air pockets, which allows water and air to enter the soil. So some people might not realize this, but roots actually need oxygen in order to absorb nutrients. If they're surrounded by water all the time or it's waterlogged, they won't be able to take in nutrients. Same thing, if it's too compacted, they'll have a really hard time. So yes, to get more specific information on the chemical properties, we'll come back to that in a second. You'd need to send it to a lab if you really want a very, very detailed analysis, but there's actually soil test kits you can do at home for soil nutrients. We'll come back to that in a second. So structure is something that is very important and something very underestimated and something that we're actually one of the biggest enemies of soil structure. So I don't know how many of you have tilled their garden this year, turned the soil over, but that's actually one of the things that we do that isn't so good for this part of soil health. So we'll come back to that and how to fix that in a bit. Okay, so chemical, here you'll see I have something about pH. Now pH is a little bit more of an advanced concept, and we're going to stay at a base level here just to keep it accessible for everybody. What you really just need to know is that your pH should be between 5.5 and 7. 7 is neutral, is like most water. 5.5 is slightly acidic. That's where nutrients or plant food is available to the plants. Outside of those ranges, plants will not be able to take up their food from the ground. Some plants really like a lot of acid, such as blueberries and azaleas are classic ones. So if you're trying to grow blueberries, sometimes you'll have to add something to acidify your soil. So for chemical, we're really talking here about the nutrients in the soil. And I'm sure you've all seen a bag of fertilizer with numbers on them and maybe wondered what those numbers mean. So the numbers on bags of fertilizers indicate nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content. So nitrogen is the element that plants need in the biggest quantity. They need a lot of it, and they need it for for green growth. Nitrogen is a part of all protein, of all molecules basically inside of a plant, and more importantly, of chlorophyll. So chlorophyll needs nitrogen. Chlorophyll is the pigment that allows the sun or the plant to capture the energy from the sun. So without nitrogen, the plant can't do photosynthesis. Therefore, it can't produce energy and it can't grow. So we really need to make sure our soil has enough nitrogen. Phosphorus is important for root development and early plant growth, and also for seed formation. So it's also a very important one. And potassium, finally, plant vigor, disease, stress resistance, and that's the one that's really going to perk up those flavors and colors. So when we buy fertilizer, we have the NPK indicators on it in order. And this is actually in the order that plants require them the most to least. And the numbers on the bag indicate the percentage of this element in the fertilizer. So if it says 10-0-0, that means it's 10% nitrogen. 10% of the weight is actually nitrogen. So this can get pretty complex, so we're not going to spend too much time on actually looking at fertilizers today. We're trying to get away from fertilizers, so but I just want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Plants also need other nutrients in lesser quantity, but still in considerable amounts, so calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, and micronutrients called boron, chlorine, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. So those are all naturally occurring elements, and plants need a little bit of them, just like we do. They're micronutrients for lots of living things. You'd probably poison yourself if you ate a spoonful of copper, but without copper, you can have really bad health problems as well. So it's all about balance. Okay. So finally, the most important thing, what we're here to talk about today the most, is the biological aspect of our soil health triangle here. So biology is what is going to tie everything together and make everything function. It's kind of like the engine of the soil motor, that carbon recycling machine, and we're going to learn why. So soil, as we have mentioned earlier, a lot of us kind of see it as this kind of dead, dusty thing. But if we actually look deeper, it's a really complex ecosystem. we've got, on the surface and on the bottom, they're all connected. It's kind of like an interface between the above ground and the below, but we have our roots and we have our mushrooms, we have our earthworms and all these ants and bugs and the bugs that will lay their eggs in the soil and do part of their life cycle in the soil. So it's an important habitat. And when we're gardening, we should try to amplify that, to make that garden even more alive, instead of our kind of like natural tendency to want to eradicate and eliminate. Oh, there's a weed, I need to remove it. Oh, there's a bug, I need to remove it. The idea here is we want to really create that natural style ecosystem. Because if you think of a forest never needs to be fertilized. Sure, it has different types of plants in it, but a forest can actually feed itself and provide for itself over a long time. And we kind of want to recreate that in our garden. Just natural functioning and natural cycling of elements, which all of these bugs and stuff are all responsible for. If we look even closer, so that's my favorite part of soil science, is the microbiology, being a biologist myself. But what we can't see with the naked eye is really fascinating. We get into what we call protozoa, which are small single-celled organisms which feed on bacteria and mushrooms and different things. So the soil, in 1 teaspoon, there's more living things than there is on all of the planet. So more than all humans that exist, you can find that in 1 teaspoon of soil. So we'll come back to why worms are important in a minute. That's actually I have a couple of slides on that. So this here is an experiment I wanted to share that I do every year at the museum. So you can take a pair of cotton undies or a cotton t-shirt or anything that is made of 100% cotton. Cotton is a plant, therefore it will decompose. And so if you bury it in the first top 30 centimeters of your soil, because all biological, or most of it, I shouldn't say all, but most biological activity, most bacteria, most things that we find in the soil are active in just the top 30 centimeters. It's not a lot. So if you bury your undies and you come back 2 months later, if your soil is biologically active, if you have a lot of microbial action in there, a lot of worms, a lot of protozoa, a lot of small insects, what you should have after 2 months is barely anything left. You can see we only have the straps left, which are the elastics. These don't decompose. So our soil doesn't look like much, but from this, we can actually visualize all the biological activity that's going on over time, which I think is a really fascinating experiment. It was piloted by the Soil Conservation Council of Canada, and you can find more detailed instructions by Googling "soil your undies." So "soil your undies" is the project. Now, we're going to look at here. So we're talking about underground life, what we can't see with our eyes right now. We're talking about all those little things, those tiny little creatures that live underground in our soil everywhere. And now we're going to talk about how we can actually harness their powers to help us in our gardens. Okay, so our main microbial allies, which there's quite a few of them, but there's some microbes that live underground that will help us help our plants. Now we can help those microbes, okay? But first off, what's really interesting to know as well is that plants speak to these microbes underground. And the way they do this is actually through chemical messages. So we've just represented it here with little shapes, but you can imagine these being sugars, fats, and some protein compounds. And the plants actually send that into the ground to attract these microorganisms. So again, bacteria, fungus, small insects, and things like that. And they attract them over to their roots so they can enlist them in growing nice and strong. So actually it's been estimated, I'm not going to say it is, but it's about 80% of photosynthesis sugars that go into the soil through the roots. So there's a lot going on that until recently humans weren't really aware of. So we're going to start looking at these three groups that you can actually encourage in your garden, and by encouraging these, you will help your plants as well. So the first one we're going to look at is our recyclers. So the ones that live in the root zone. So there's bacteria that live right around these roots. They're attracted by the root exudates. And most of them are recyclers. So we talked about how they were able to eat cotton, recycle it. So actually 80 to 90% of microorganisms in compost are bacteria. So these here, what you see are images produced with a scanning electron microscope, which is a microscope that can zoom in way more than an optical microscope, like a microscope with a lens. It's a very big piece of equipment, but with that, they can actually zoom in and see bacteria and fungus and things like that. So these here are decomposing bacteria. This is what they look like. And this here is actually a piece of compost. And on it, you can see the different organisms. We have bacteria here. These are other types. And there's also a bit of fungus on here. And these are two different types of soil bacteria. So there's bacteria everywhere. And there's an interesting kind of link here, two things. So there's more and more studies coming out about how gardening could really be really beneficial for health, because we're being exposed to these thousands and thousands of species of bacteria and microorganisms. When we're in the dirt, we're breathing it in, we're being exposed to them. It's kind of like that old adage of, send the kids to play in the dirt, or, eat a teaspoon of dirt. It's kind of like that natural immunity we get from our environment. So if you're gardening a lot, there's chances are that you're exposing yourself to all kinds of organisms, which our body does react to without us really realizing it. And another thing that I found out recently is that smell after the rain. There's actually a word for it. It's called petrichor. And that smell, so when it rains hard, and then I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, is actually released by soil bacteria. So there's bacteria in the soil, and when it gets wet and they get happy because they can be activated and start eating, they release that odor, and that's what we smell. So I found that pretty fascinating when I found out. So I have a video here. I'm not sure if it will function. It's a little bit, oh, there you go. I hope you can see this. This is a video that I took using a microscope at the museum of some organisms we find in our vermicompost. So we create compost indoors using earthworms. And there's some juice that comes out of it because like excess liquid. And we sometimes take a little pipette of it, put it on a slide, look at it under the microscope. And these are some of the creatures that we can see. So these are the protozoa I was talking about earlier. We have one right here, a spirotrich, and that one goes around and eats microbes. And this guy here, it's called a rotifer. So the rotifers, they have little fans on each side of their head, so to speak. And they just create a current in the water, and they feed on the bacterium and the fungus and things like that get caught in the currents and sucked into their mouths. So I'll just fast forward it a bit. Here we go. We can actually see the thing eating right now. So this is very, very small. Like there's no way you would see this with the naked eye. It just caught something right there. So that's just to show I'm not sure where that video is probably supposed to be at another spot, but I think it works there anyways. So you can see here, there's a lot of organisms that are hiding away, and they're all eating, they're all pooping, they're all creating waste. So that waste actually becomes the new plant food. So I'll move on here. So we had our decomposers, and our decomposers include bacteria, but also protozoa, which will take part in the whole thing. Nitrogen fixers, okay? So these are very, very important to know as well. So there's legume plants, so that includes anything that is a bean, a pea, clover. Those are legume plants. And what's really cool and special about legumes is that they will form a symbiotic association with soil bacteria. So what does that mean? That means that they will team up with soil microbes. Okay, there's this very specific type of bacteria that lives in the soil. There's a few species of them. And when the plant starts to grow, it will send out little signals, again, with sugars and things. It'll send signals in the soil, which will attract those bacteria to their roots. Then the bacteria will create a little nodule. So you can see here, this is actually a picture I took of clover. So I just uprooted a piece of clover here, white clover. And you can see on the roots, these little balls here. So these are root nodules, and all legume plants have these. And it gives them the special ability to not need nitrogen from the soil. They'll still take up some nitrogen from the soil, but really what happens here is that these bacteria, what they do is they are able to take the nitrogen that is in the air, because the air is made of oxygen and nitrogen and other gases. They'll take nitrogen from the air and store it away in these little root balls. Now the plant has access to that nitrogen, because plants can't take nitrogen from the air. It has to be in more of a solid form. So in this case here, the bacteria, in return for feeding the plant nitrogen, it gets some sugars from the plant. So it's a win-win for both of them. So again, like soya, clovers, there's some trees as well that are legumes. I know the Kentucky coffee tree is one. So there's different ones out there. Now legumes, what's really interesting about them is that you can use them, you can leave them in your garden. They're actually pretty good, because once the plant dies off, so in the winter, when the green part of the clover dies, the roots stay in the soil and degrade and feed the next crop. So that's why in crop rotations, we're told to plant legumes after tomatoes or peppers. So legumes are plants that form little balls. They're usually, legumes, one easy way to identify them is the plants that make beans and peas. So if the plant makes like green beans, that's a legume. Green peas are legumes. So there's a lot of examples for the garden. Legumes I have in my garden currently, I have soybeans, I have snap peas, and I have various types of beans. So those are actually all planted where we had tomatoes last year. So to try to enrich the soil with nitrogen, as the tomatoes take up a lot of nitrogen, they have a lot of green growth, so they have a high need in nitrogen. So nitrogen fixers, you can actually have some inoculants. So inoculants are a little powder that you will coat your seeds with or put in your little furrow, and they contain living bacteria of the right type, so that when the roots grow, the bacteria will be right there already and ready to colonize the roots. So that's something you can do. You can buy inoculants, but typically it's not necessary. These bacteria are in the soil naturally. So nitrogen fixer bacteria, very important. And these plants here, also very important in your garden. A lot of our weeds are also legumes. So sometimes weeds, it's good to know what they are in order to leave them. The third thing that you should know about for your garden is our friendly nutrient miners. So here we're talking about mushrooms. Okay, so there's a lot of different types of mushrooms underground. Mycorrhizae, myco means mushroom, rhizae means root. So mycorrhizae, they're beneficial fungi. They grow, again, symbiotically. So that means it's beneficial for both organisms on roots. and they extend the root structure. So this is the reason we don't want to break apart our soil too much or stir it, because these guys are very, very, very sensitive to disturbance. If you can see here, I'm using trees because that was the nicest graphic I could find that really described it. But mycorrhizae don't team up with all plants, but most of them. For example, cabbages don't team up with mycorrhizae, but most other plants do. And what they do, it's kind of like the soil's internet. So each plant will connect into it, and they will allow the plant to reach nutrients that are further away by basically extending the roots. So imagine it's kind of like a root, and then you have this mushroom root that allows it to gain water and nutrients much further. So if you've ever dug a hole in the forest and seen some white, I don't know, white fluff underground, that's actually the mycelium, that's the fungus. And that's happening in our garden. Our plants are actually plugging into this mushroom network, and the mushroom network is allowing them to get more phosphorus, more water, other nutrients from far away. And that's another thing you can buy an inoculant for. So I don't know if you can see me, but I have a little package. The one that we have in Ontario, anyways, that's basically the only one I've seen, is called Mike. And that will, again, add more seeds, so to speak, in the ground, so that your plants, when they do grow, the mushroom will also grow and create this nice big net. So all your plants in your garden are actually interconnected thanks to these underground mushrooms. Ooh, time is flying. So you might be wondering now, what can we do to encourage this soil biology? Because the soil biology, basically what it's doing is it's recycling dead things into plant nutrients again and storing away carbon. Okay, so it's a little bit complex, but there's 5 simple rules of things you can do, especially for new gardeners. These are all things I do, and they don't require much more work and sometimes reduce your amount of work. So first of all, reduce your disturbances. Okay, oh, I thought I had them. Okay. So minimize soil disturbance. So that rototiller, you can park it, you can sell it, you don't need it anymore. You don't need to do hours of back-breaking work. This whole idea of turning soil over has some merit to it. People do it so that weed seeds don't grow. Farmers have been doing it for thousands of years to control weed seeds and to reincorporate dead plants into the soil. But more and more studies are finding that that is really detrimental to the soil health, and over time kills our soil. It destroys all the microbial life in the soil and makes your soil poorer. That means you'll have to fertilize it. You'll have to add extra for it to be able to feed your plants. Another thing it does, it breaks apart your structure. So water doesn't infiltrate as much. It makes your soil more compacted. So it's not, you're still going to get results. You're still going to do great, but you might need to fertilize a lot more than if you just let nature take its course and over time recycle itself. So there's a lot of techniques. So this is called no-till agriculture. This is the next big thing in agriculture, by the way. The next big thing taking over farms all over Canada are switching to no-till agriculture. It involves a whole new set of machinery and techniques, but the will is there and we know it's better. That's where we're going. Yes, you can fluff up the soil rather than dig it up. You can, what you could do is just like kind of fork it, or you can, you know, if I usually just move it when I'm planting, really. You don't even need to fluff it up because all your microorganisms are creating the perfect environment, and the bacteria and the communities are spreading out and establishing themselves in the way they want to be. So every time we disturb it, we're actually messing up those communities. So yeah, so it works quite well to just plant in what you had last year. We'll come back to that in a minute. I go a little bit more in detail. So maximize crop diversity. In this picture here, you can see we've got a lot of different crops in a small space. Our packages of seeds tell us to plant one seed every, couple inches, 6 inches apart. You can actually broadcast spread a lot of seeds, and it'll have a much denser foliage, more roots. Everything's happier. It might not grow as fast, but as you can see here, we've got a bunch of greens and lettuces at the museum growing, and they did fine. And this was just planted directly in the bin from last year. We didn't empty it, we didn't turn it. It was just straight into it in the spring. And keep soil covered. Okay, so again, this falls into the turning soil over, turning the vegetation back under into our soil. That's not really needed and will actually tie up nutrients. You can leave vegetation on top. My favorite thing to use is leaves. Again, more details coming. And finally, add compost and manure. Those are very, very, very carbon rich and will feed your soil biology. They'll feed your plants and get your garden all nice and ready for the next year. It'll replenish a lot. Carbon is lost from soil every year, so we always need to be adding more. A lot of gardening problems can actually be chalked up to just not enough organic matter, because we talked about the physical properties earlier, the rock parts, but the carbon that I mentioned earlier is kind of like that fourth piece of the physical. So without your carbon, without your dead plant matter, your soil structure is just going to stay dusty. It won't be able to clump up. Now, triple mix is it's a mix of compost, peat moss, and soil. So it's kind of a mix that is sold to gardeners as a ready to go, especially for container gardens. So triple mix will have a mixture of different elements, but definitely have some organic matter. So if you add manure, do you work it in then? So you can actually leave it on the surface and fork it in a little bit. And the best time to add manure would be in the fall when you're putting your garden to bed. But you can also top dress your plants with manure, so just around them, and you don't really need to incorporate it much. It'll leach into the soil itself. When it's really important to incorporate is if you're adding fresh manure, like fresh poop, and I would never recommend that. There's a lot of risks to it, from disease, also to burning your plants and tying up nitrogen. So what happens when you're incorporating fresh plant matter into your soil, the bacteria, the microbes in your soil will kind of have a party. They're gonna like, woohoo, it's time to eat, and they're gonna proliferate. There's gonna be tons and tons of them. But because bacteria are made of nitrogen, so they have nitrogen inside of them as well, that is nitrogen from the soil that is no longer available for the plants. If that makes sense. So because the nitrogen is now tied up in bacteria that are eating the organic matter, eating what you put in your soil, the nitrogen will only be available again once these bacteria die. So that's why it's not recommended to like turn fresh vegetation in necessarily. You can, but you might need to add extra nutrients in the early stages of your baby plant's life, because nutrient deficiencies early in life will kind of keep following the plant. The plant will never really recover from being nutrient depleted early on. So let's just look real quick, because time is flying, and living roots year round as well. There's a lot of plants that can tolerate winter, and living roots in your soil year round will feed your bacteria year round. So they've done studies and found that there's actually bacteria that are still active even when it's minus 40 degrees out. So since these bacteria and plants talk to each other, you want to provide plants that can keep feeding them and keeping them active so that they're there next year when you come back. So living roots, it could be leaving plants leaving plants there, or for example, like just cutting off a tomato at the base instead of pulling it off. That way you're leaving the roots in there. And you can leave things like kale, cabbages, onions. You can plant garlic. All those things will survive winter. So next page, fertilizing, okay. Add compost and manure. Compost and manure don't have high nutrient content, but over time they will degrade and feed your garden. So if you're adding compost now, you probably won't really get, well, some of it will be available this year, but most of it also next year. So compost is something you want to do every year, and in the fall, preferably, or early spring before planting. By organic amendment, we don't mean organic like organic food, organic as in like organic matter, so from living origin. So organic amendments, they contain organic matter and nutrients. That's what you want to do as much as possible. The idea of adding just nutrients is a little bit starting to fall out of favor because you're not adding the plant food, the bacteria food. You're only adding plant food. And if the plants are getting all the food they want, then they're not going to talk to the bacteria and the microbes. And those microbes and bacteria are going to start to die off because they're not needed. So that's why it's important to always add organic matter. So options here are manure, leaf mold, compost, vermicast. So vermicast is poop from worms. Bone and blood meal, and fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is a little stinky. If you don't like fish, I wouldn't recommend it, but it provides a lot of micronutrients for the plants that might not be. I really like chicken manure. So there's actually pelleted chicken manure that you can get, and that makes plants explode. And that one is something that you can use along with compost. So for example, if you put compost in the spring, when you put your tomatoes in, you could put a little sprinkling of the hen manure on the soil, which will enter the soil when it's wet and feed your plants then. Okay, so what was I talking about with mulch? Yes, so this is actually, yes, exactly. It helps preserve topsoil from erosion, and that is super important. Now this slide here, you can see this is the garden that I share with my friends. We have a big maple in the front yard, and instead of putting those leaves in bags up the street, we just dump all of those leaves in the garden in the fall, and we kind of put our garden to bed. And this is what it looked like this spring. So we just kind of went around and fluffed up the leaves, and this is what we would consider mulch. So mulch is super important in reducing erosion, especially if you're gardening in a hill. Mulch is just a cover of vegetation that will prevent water from splashing your soil away. It will help your water infiltrate instead of running off. And honestly, since we've started doing that, we have zero problems with erosion. All our soil is staying put. And you can see here, we were planting our onions. We like to do furrows. So you can still disturb it. You can plant directly in, but see, we just did furrows, put our onions in, and put the leaves back on top. Here we have garlic that we planted in the fall, and there's some leftover peppers and things that we didn't remove. So that's what it looks like in action, and that will help preserve your topsoil. And look how black this is. So we haven't added fertilizers or compost in a couple of years. We just do the leaves. We do a little bit of top dress fertilizer around our plants, but our soil is very rich. It's beautiful. It's so alive. I would say it's the best thing we've done. So here you can see when I was saying, instead of pulling out your plants, just chop them and leave the roots in. And then in the spring, you can just plant, just move the leaves aside, plant directly into it. No problem with doing that at all. Basically, like I said, we're trying to recreate the forest floor here. If you look at 1 cubic foot of forest floor, you'll have all of these organisms in here, which are decomposers, which are part of that ecosystem. So by adding mulch, we're kind of recreating that. So there is one pitfall, though, is that it does provide an environment for potential pests to make their homes. Depending on the type of mulch you use, don't use hay, because hay is grass and you'll have a garden full of grass. So depending on the type of plant you use to mulch with, you might end up with weeds. But in theory, it helps suppress weeds. So because the weeds don't have any sun, they can't pop up. It also helps water less. So by mulching, this one thing you do, it'll probably reduce the amount of times you have to water in the summer and help your plants survive intense droughts. It'll prevent erosion. It'll feed your soil organisms. So for me, I feel like that's the most accessible and easy thing to do as a first-time gardener, especially to have really good success and get your soil started on the right track. Okay, so earthworms. Earthworms are super important in the garden. Not so much in forests. Never dump your fishing worm in the forest. They don't belong there. They're not from there. Actually, all worms are invasive species, but in our gardens and agricultural fields, they do more good than harm. So in your garden, you'll start to notice your leaves are disappearing, and you'll start to notice some clumps of vegetation on the soil. And if you're curious like me, you'll start to pull on them and see what's underneath. And I hope you can see this. So this is a plug of vegetation that was plugging an earthworm hole. Okay, so these earthworms, these big giant ones here, what they like to do is they come up and they pull vegetation into their earthworm holes. So they're recycling all these leaves, and they're putting all of they're taking this in, they're eating it, and their droppings are basically compost. So they're awesome because they're bringing compost directly into your soil. By the end of the summer, there's no leaves left in our garden. Like, they're all eaten by the worms, and everywhere in the garden you see these. So, and you can see all of this here, all of these little nuggets, that's all earthworm droppings as well. So this is pure leaf compost right here, right on top of our soil. So you can see by having a lot of living organisms and by not chopping up our earthworms when we're stirring our soil, we're encouraging these permanent tunnels that allow water to enter and allow worms to pull in all that organic matter. So last, a little slide here. Earthworms, there's actually 4 types. So there's actually 4 types. There's the ones that go very, very deep. There's the ones that stay in the surface, the ones that are a little bit in the ground and in the leaves, and then there's the ones that stay in the middle that are smaller. Now, you don't need to put dead leaves on top of a flower garden. You could put wooden mulch, works just as well. So all garden centers sell wood mulch. They're basically wood chips. You can get all types of colors. You can get no color. Those work really well for weed suppression. You basically won't have to weed your garden anymore, and will really help the water absorb and help replenish that soil. So yes, dead leaves are not obligatory. There's a lot of other options for mulch. There's even plastic mulch, which is perforated, and you can just put that over top. So there's lots of options for people to try and experiment. If leaves are not too unsightly for you, I would encourage trying it out. They do disappear rather quickly. And the plastic is biodegradable for that. It's a plant-based plastic that biodegrades in the garden. So, and here finally, this is just a shot into the vermicompost bin that I have at work. And these are the little earthworms that eat all of my food and paper and make some compost. So for those who might want to try creating their own compost, worms are a really great way to do this. And I'll wrap it up right here. So you too can have a garden like this. Just take care of your soil, put in a couple practices in, you can reduce your amount of work, and keep learning. There's so much to learn, and there's so much information out there, but I hope this gave you a good primer to get gardening and get some beautiful, rich, amazingly full of life soil. So I will open it up for questions.
Thanks so much, Renée-Claude. I'm just going to mention to everybody that it is 3 o'clock. So if you aren't able to stay beyond the hour, I just want to make sure that I have an opportunity to say thank you very much to Renée-Claude for joining us and giving us all this cool information. I can imagine that when you do a presentation like this to kids at the museum, that they love it because it's bugs and worms and poop, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Very, very fascinating. We do have some questions in the chat and in the Q&A, so I'll turn it over to Marlene to ask some of those questions. And just so that everybody knows, we're planning to kind of stick around for 10-15 minutes or so to see if we can get some of those answered for you. And then we'll have to sort of call it quits. It's like having our own specialist and expert here, but we could stay all day if we didn't make a time limit. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us if you have to leave, everyone. And I'll turn it over to Marlene to ask Renée-Claude some of the questions from the chat.
All right, thanks, Tracy. Renée-Claude, that was wonderful, really fascinating. Got some great tips from your talk for my own garden, so that's wonderful.
Great.
We did get quite a few questions, and I noticed that you answered quite a few as you were going along, so that's great. We have some stuff in the Q&A and from the chat. So I kept a list of questions from the chat. One of them was, I've had a problem with tomatoes planted in pots getting rot. I was told that the soil may be missing calcium and put some crushed eggshells in the soil this year. Should that help?
Okay, so was it, I'm wondering if it was the fruit that was rotting or if it was the plant that was rotting. But when the fruit rots at the bottom, if that's what you're talking about, the blossom end rot, that is a calcium deficiency. Crushed eggshells can work, but they would have to be a very fine powder to be active right away. Eventually it will help, but another thing, I'm trying to see, you could try to add a fertilizer that has like the fish emulsion that has a lot of the micronutrients in it. So it might help. Crushed eggshells can help to add a little bit of calcium, but it's not a considerable amount. You would probably need to get a specific amendment for it.
Okay, great, thanks. That's actually a problem that I've had with my tomatoes as well, so I was interested in that answer. Another question was the jar test. What is on top, middle, bottom when it settles?
So jar test, what you'll have on top will be your clay, middle will be silt, and bottom will be sand. And you'll also have some organic matter floating at the top.
Great. What makes your soil acidic? They want to plant blueberry trees.
Pine needles. So pine needles will really acidify your soil, and that's actually a problem in some parts. I'm actually from Northern Ontario, and that's one of our problems with our garden soils. There's so much coniferous trees and pine needles that fall that we kind of have to boost the pH so it's less acidic. So you can also get specific amendments to acidify your soil. I can't remember the names right now, but there is I think aluminum, I'm not going to say it because I don't know, but there are specific things. So if you do a quick Google search, you could look like organic amendment to acidify soil. You'll get tons of answers.
Okay, another question is how to get rid of mole crickets.
Mole crickets, so I don't know those. That's an interesting, so you could try pitfall traps. I wonder, sometimes if you have like, especially earwigs, pitfall traps are basically like you would take a little yogurt container, dig a little hole in the soil, put it in, flush with the soil and put water and oil in it. Or just oil also works, but the bugs that are crawling will keep going and fall into it. So that's good for controlling earwigs, but for mole crickets, I'm not sure. I don't have any experience with that. I do hope you're able to find your answer though.
Okay, great. Another question from someone in Victoria, BC is asking, I'm trying to keep my vegetable patches as organic as possible. Would you recommend horse, sheep, or chicken manure? I have beans, tomatoes, cabbage, cucumbers, many squashes, pumpkins, beets, turnips, and herbs.
Manure will depend really on what the animals are fed and what type of bedding was also incorporated in it. So chicken manure would be the most, the richest. Horse is also up there, and then sheep, and then cow manure. So in theory, though, it'll say on the bag, and you should compare from company to company if you're buying it, or if you're getting it from a farm, it's hard to know. But if you're really hoping to give it a good boost, I would give it some sheep manure. Cow manure has a bit less nutrients in it, but it's really good for organic matter.
Okay, great. Thank you. Someone's asking your suggestion regarding pH testing.
So for pH testing, you can get little kits where they come with the NPK tests, and you'll usually get a pH test as well. They're little plastic clear boxes with colorful lids, and they have like little gel capsules that contain certain compounds that when you mix it with your soil and water, it'll react and give you a color. And then you have to just compare that color to a little reading chart. So those kits usually come together, those 4 tests. If you want to try something at home, you can try just the old adding vinegar to it, or adding baking soda. If it bubbles either way, your pH might be a little out of line on either range. So if you add vinegar to your soil and it bubbles, then that means your soil is very basic. And if you add baking soda and water to your soil and it bubbles, then it might be too acidic. But that's not scientific. I would recommend finding one of those little pH tests that comes usually with the nutrient tests. I have a nutrient test from La Motte, which is a company that does this. It's a little bit more expensive, or a lot more, I'd say, but you get bottles of reagents and you can get many tests out of it. But it is a bigger investment, but you'll get a pH testing vial as well.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll try get some questions from the Q&A. Is it okay to add CPM to my beds every year or less frequently? And how many inches is enough?
So CPM?
CPM, yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not sure. Compost. I'm not sure of the acronym. If the person is still there, could you please just specify CPM, just because I'm not sure where we're at. But we can come back to that.
We'll come back to that if we get the answer. So using water and soil in a jar method, how could you determine which, for example, type of loam, etc. you have? I get that the layers will give you a basic idea of the composition, but would you need to send it out to a lab to get more specific?
Sending it out to a lab, what they would do mostly, it would be for pollutants. If you're starting a new garden in the city, for example, and you're not sure, it's always a good idea to get your soil tested for any contaminants that it might contain. You don't want to grow food in something that's contaminated with something really toxic, which in the city you never know. And getting it tested professionally would also give you a better idea of your nutrient situation. But in terms of soil composition, the typical tests are the jar method. There's other ones. There's one that's like you make a little snake out of your soil, and based on when it breaks, that'll indicate what type of soil you have. Another thing you could do is get a soil sieve set, and that'll actually separate your different components and you'll get a better idea. But it's all pretty rudimentary. I'd imagine getting it tested professionally, they would probably be able to let you know, but typically for professional tests, it's more for the chemical aspects of your soil.
Okay. Any tips for Japanese beetle prevention?
Okay. They like yellow. They're attracted to yellow. So I've seen this thing. I have not tried it yet. It is on my list of things this summer, but it's a little bit of a, it's kind of like a trap. So it's like a yellow bag, and you put that a certain distance from your garden, and that should catch them before they get to your garden. But as far as I know, it's mostly just integrated pest management. That means monitoring, physical control, so going in and picking them off and disposing of them. The best way to do that is a bucket with soap and water. So you just grab a bucket and soap and water, and then you go out there and you pick the beetles and pop them in there. They come, they're ravenous, they're invasive, there's no predators for them. So really you just have to keep an eye out and watch and try all the things. Chemicals usually last resort, but there are some organic pesticides. So that's an option if that's where you want to go. But yeah, it's a bad situation because they eat everything. So I sympathize. I hope that, but look up Japanese beetle trap and see maybe there's something there for you.
Okay, great, thank you. What is the best cover for the soil? I don't really like bark chips.
The best cover. So I'm a big fan of straw. But if you're going to use straw, you will have some wheat that will grow once here and there, because straw is the stem from wheat and barley. So sometimes there's still some seeds on them. But yeah, straw is really good. It's rich in carbon and has other nutrients. Just if you use straw, what I would recommend is soaking the straw first, like soak your straw bale with water, get it really imbibed, and then put it on your garden, because if it's really dry and let's say it's a windy day, you're just going to lose all of your mulch. So I like to put down my straw and then water it. But straw would be my main recommendation. I don't recommend sawdust, because that will really tie up your nitrogen in your garden. That's too much. Or fresh wood chips. Like if somebody just chopped down a tree, it's not so great to use those in your garden. But the mulch we buy in stores, which is like, it's not necessarily like fresh tree, they don't cause as many influxes, let's say, of bacteria.
Okay, maybe we'll just take one or two more questions. Can we apply the same principles to caring for soil in raised beds and containers?
Absolutely. We mulch all of our beds at the museum. We never turn them over or dig them up. And you might be wondering how we add compost if we don't dig them. We really just like top dress it in the fall and then add a layer of mulch. So because by the end of the summer, you barely have any mulch left. It's all kind of gone. So you can, do your top dress, do your mulch, and then it's good for winter. But yeah, so you can apply all of that to container gardening. You'll probably need to rely a bit more on fertilizers regardless for container gardening, because you don't have the same depth and expanse. So even if you do use mycorrhizal fungi, like it'll help, but at a certain point you'll have depleted most of what was in your container for the year. So for like tomatoes and peppers, things that take a lot of nutrients, you'll still want to add an organic amendment or something to kind of keep it going through. Plants' main nutritional needs are really early on in their life, and it kind of tapers off. So they have a kind of a curve. So really, if you can supply them some nutrients in the beginning, and then usually they'll be good.
Okay, so we got the answer about what CPM is. It's composted pine mulch.
Aha, okay. I have used that in the past, not multiple years in a row, but I don't think it's an issue to use it every year. I wouldn't see it. Because it's pre-composted, its acidity levels are not as, or I want to say lower, but that it's more neutral. It's not as acidic. So I don't think it's a problem. If you were just using straight up pine mulch over and over and over, you might risk it acidifying over time, but composted pine mulch, my experience with it was great, no problems.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Renée-Claude. That's about all we have time for this afternoon, but I thank you so much for your talk. It was, as I said earlier, fascinating.
Well, thank you so much. And if there's any more burning questions, I can put my email address right here. I don't mind getting messages. I can try to answer. I'm not Ed Lawrence, but you know, I still really like to do this. So I'll just pop my email in here. If you have any outstanding questions, feel free to send me a little email and I will reply as soon as I can.
Wonderful. That's very generous of you. You might get inundated with questions.
And maybe I'll make a blog post out of it if that happens.
There you go. All the questions after my presentation with the Ottawa Public Library. I just want to let people know that Renée-Claude's joining us again tomorrow to provide the same presentation, but in French. So share that word around or visit us again. And next week we have our last program in the gardening series, 10 Easy City Vegetables. Same time, same place, 2 p.m. on Wednesday. So you can go ahead and register for that. I've put the link in the chat. Did it work? Renée-Claude, is your email down in there?
I noticed I only sent it to you guys. So now I'm putting in there to all panelists. So it's rgoulet, R-G-O-U-L-E-T @ingeniumcanada.org.
I'll give everybody just a minute to make sure they've got that jotted down or taken a screenshot.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. That was really, really interesting. And I can tell just by the chat that people are quite interested. Oh, can you send it again?
Oh,
people are saying.
That's
To all panelists and attendees.
And I'll just share, I'll do one thing. I'll share my screen. It's at the beginning of my presentation. So then you'll be able to see it nice and clear. Give me 1 second.
I'm going to pop it in here too, Renée-Claude, okay?
Okay. Oh, actually, I didn't put it in there, but I will.
I've just sent it in the chat. It looked as though you were sending it to the panelists, which means that we were getting it.
Again.
I just shared it out to the panelists and attendees. I'll give them a minute just to jot that down. There you go. Perfect. Wonderful.
My Twitter handle is RC Goulet, so you can always hit me up on Twitter too, if that works better for those who are.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Renée-Claude. That was amazing.
And thank you for having me.
So thrilled to have you. Thanks again. Have a good day, everybody, and happy gardening.